Welcome to the Startup Grind. We are really excited to be here. Really appreciate Charles. Doing this with Charles tonight, it's kind of it's a guilty pleasure for me because I worked at EA for 4 years and have been a huge fan of his products and his work for a very, very long time. Charles attended the University of Berkeley, California, originally born in Taiwan but moved here at a very early age. He and his brother co-founded Red Octane in 1999, and we're going to hear this whole story, and it is just absolutely fascinating. But eventually, as you all know, in 2005 went on to build Guitar Hero, which became one of the most successful video games of all time. And I checked the NPD data today, and in North America did over 30 million units, more than double that worldwide, and did over gross of over $5 billion. So really, really incredible. Charles, after getting acquired by Activision in the last year or so, has founded 2 game companies, which are housed here.
Yes.
Green Throttle, as well as Blue Goji, and we're going to see some of those products towards the end of tonight. But let's give Charles a big round of applause for being here.
Yeah. So, sorry about cramming everybody in this. We don't have open space in this little office, so I apologize for that.
This is great. It's called Startup Grind, so
yeah.
It's only fair.
It feels cozy.
Yeah, I mean, you have this huge success with Guitar Hero, and Activision acquires your company, and here you are doing this whole thing again. Why not? It's in a good sized space, but you're not. You guys are kind of back in the startup mode again, right? You're not living large, spending money like crazy. What's with that?
No, so I started off trying to work from home for as long as I could till my wife got sick of seeing me sitting at home. And so she kicked me out of the house, and I had to go get an office. And the first office we got was a small office that's smaller than half the size. And I got a sense of being back in a startup when the first day I went into the office, and it was just me, because my brother and I were the only 2 people at the time in the company. He was on vacation. So I went in the office, and I realized, hey, there's no water here. And I thought, well, who can I tell to get water? And there's nobody, it's just me. And then I thought, well, I need to hire somebody to get water. And I said, who do I tell to hire that person? Well, there's nobody else to tell to hire that. And so you realize, oh, there's just me sitting here. And if I don't have water, I better go out and get some water then. And so it really began this this sort of interesting, what I call kind of like in the Rocky movies where Rocky goes back to the grimy gym. But that was exciting, and it took a few weeks to get back. But it was like just so much more energy, when you're forced to kind of sit there and be dealing in a world where you have limited resources and trying to use them as smartly as you possibly can.
Well, I was telling people as they were walking in, we've done about 50 of these events, and you're the first speaker that's ever helped us set up chairs. So, and I think that, and we're going to hear your story, but that kind of goes along, it seems like, with what you're talking about of, kind of getting back and, just jumping in and doing whatever. But
the thing I was afraid of most the second time around was not being able to do and put up with the hardships, because you guys are all here. You know how hard it is to be in a startup, and having come through that cycle to the point where you weren't a startup anymore, you were a big company, to come back, and I was really worried about not being able to do everything that I had done before. I talked to somebody about how, because we had no money and we had an office in India, you fly to India, and one time I flew in the middle seat of coach, 24 hours. It's 12 hours to Frankfurt, 45 minutes off the plane, and then back on for another 12 hours to India. Wow. And that was the kind of stuff we used to have to do because we had no money. You take like a business trip to China for 10 days and spend less than $1,000, including airline tickets, right? Because and so I try to, as much as I can, do everything myself, just because I want to be in that frame of mind where I feel like I can do everything I need to do to make a startup work, because it's so hard.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us where you grew up, what your dad did for work, the business he had.
So I was born in Taiwan and was there all the way through half a year first grade. So my father moved the whole family. We went to a suburb in New York and spent 5 years there. And he did the classic Asian immigrant thing. We actually had a grocery store in the suburb of New York. So I worked at a grocery store in grade school, stocking cans and whatever, selling stuff, running cash registers. And then we moved out here to Mountain View, starting in junior high. And I think that was at least when I was in the 80s, that was the first time I had ever heard of tech. And some of my friends' parents were in technology companies, like working on the first hard drives. A lot of it was PC related back in those days. And it just so happened that one of my friend's dads ran a company called Oki Semiconductor. And Oki supplied all the chips for the Atari 2600 cartridges. And that was my first exposure to really how video games were made, because I had played games before. We had owned the first Pong home console on the Atari 2600, but I had never learned how the video game industry worked. And was lucky enough to have met Matt, who ironically is one of the co-founders that we have for this company. So this is how far back our relationships go. But to learn about tech, went to UC Berkeley, as Derek said, graduated. Actually spent some time in a family business after I graduated, which was, my dad at that time was in sort of import and export of auto parts and accessories, which was far from video games, but it was the place where I learned how manufacturing hardware in places like Taiwan and China worked. And then in 1999, we started Red Octane because that was the peak of the dot-com bubble, and that's what everybody did. So my brother and I, my brother who also went to Cal, got a computer science degree, and some other friends of ours started that company.
Where did that original kind of idea come from to start something together?
Yeah, that was, for those of you who were there, 98, 99 was crazy. I mean, that was the peak of the biggest bubble I've ever seen. And everybody was in a startup. Like, you'd go to some random office, or event somewhere, and everybody, you asked how many people were in a startup, and everybody would have their hands up. It was just the thing to do. And there was a unique window in time there where you could basically start an internet business in almost any field with almost any background. And I would say you would get, just with a PowerPoint, you get $1 million in funding. And if the PowerPoint was any good, you'd get $2 million in funding. Right? That was how crazy it was. And so we were just part of this massive wave of people who thought, hey, we could do that. And so we started a company and raised $1 million with a PowerPoint. And we started the company doing online game rentals, like the Netflix DVD rentals for video games, and that was the first business Red Octane was in.
And you did that, and you launched right about the same time as Netflix, right?
Yeah.
6 months later or something like that?
Yes, yeah. We launched our business about 6 months after Netflix launched their business. And so we were the first to do that. There's a company now called Gamefly, which does the same thing, but
Sure.
we were the first to do that. And unfortunately for us, about 6 months after we launched, April 2000 hit, and the dot-com bubble kind of burst. And so we had to figure out a new business model, because anything that was, back in those days, a B2C, right, internet e-commerce model just was never going to get funding. And for a while there, it looked like VCs were never going to fund another startup ever again. Through 2001 and 2002, it just looked like the whole valley was just going to die and go away. And so we had to figure out a new business. So that's when we started scrambling and looking at video game hardware, and then eventually video game software. And so that was the beginning of what was many lives of Red Octane.
So let's talk about that first life transition. So you realized that, hey, this business doesn't have any legs, and then was it you just sat down in a room? Did you brainstorm ideas? Where did it come from?
Yeah. So I would say that was one of the fortunate things, because it forced us to ask a question which a lot of startups don't ask, is should we be in this business? Right? Because you start with the idea that we're going to do this business and it's going to be fantastic. But there's really nothing ever that comes along that makes you ask, like, should we be in this business? And if we shouldn't be in this business, what business should we be in? So we were forced to ask ourselves that question, should we be in this online game rental business? And we realized quickly said no, because we're never going to get any funding for it. And without funding, you can't grow that business. And so the next question was, what business should we be in? And luckily for us, we were renting at the time a lot of PlayStation 1 games. This is how old that goes back. So PlayStation 1 was the predominant console at the time. And if you remember back in that era, you could mod your PlayStation to play,
pirated games.
Yeah, pirated games or Japanese games, right? And so there were a lot of people renting these sort of crazy video games from Japan that never made it to the United States, of which probably the biggest one rage going at that time was a music game called Dance Dance Revolution, which was huge in Asia, sort of in the late 90s, but had not made it to the U.S. But we knew people were renting them from us, and they were asking us, hey, we want to get the dance pads, because without them, you can only play, tapping on the gamepad, which isn't any fun. And so that was our first sense was, well, if people want gamepads, let's just sell them gamepads. And we kind of stumbled into that business through the existing customers that we had. And believe it or not, we started selling dance pads. We realized the dance pads that we were buying and reselling were garbage because they were breaking down. And so we thought we could make better dance pads than this. And that's where what I learned about manufacturing came into play, because I literally packed my bags, went to China, visited a few of these factories that made dance pads, figured out how they made them, and took a bunch of suggestions that users had given us and incorporated them into new designs. And so we started coming out with our own dance pads. And believe it or not, that kept the company afloat. That turned around our fortunes. We became profitable, slightly profitable, and it kept us alive through the dark days of 2001 and 2002 and 2003. And so we became known primarily for a while there as a dance pad or video game controller company.
Mm-hmm. And you had how many employees at the time? How many people working in the company?
So at that time we were about 20 people in the company.
Okay.
And selling
right? Mountain View? Or were you in Santa Clara?
We were in Sunnyvale, just down the street near Sunnyvale Muni Golf Course. So we were about 20 people then, selling everything online. And for us, we had to start that way because we couldn't afford to sell to stores, because the cash flow, the way it works is you sell to, say, GameStop, and they don't pay you for 60 to 90 days. And we didn't have the money to do that. So we had to sell everything online because when somebody orders with a credit card, you get paid in 2 days as soon as you ship the product. So that cash flow was really important for us. And it was one of our biggest lessons running a startup, was that profits were important, but cash flow was really what kept our company alive. Was even if we had sold a lot of these dance pads through retail instead of online, we probably still would have gone out of business, because the cash flow just doesn't turn as quickly. It was impossible for most companies, and for us, it was, I think, doubly impossible because of the things we were doing. We were making dance pads. We were selling them to consumers. There were a lot of things.
That was like the photo sharing app, though, of the early 2000s, wasn't it? Just everybody's making dance pads.
Yeah, dance pads. It was kind of a crazy market, but it made money, which was for us important, because we figured our number one rule, just surviving those years, was somebody told me, sort of encapsulated, was just don't go out of business, don't die. Right? As long as your company doesn't die, smart people will find a way to make things happen. But if you let your company die, that's it. You'll never have another shot. So it didn't matter whether or not we could raise money or whether the markets turned. The first thing we had to do was just make sure our company didn't die. And so each week when we started our management meetings, the first thing we looked at was how much revenues we took in and how much expenses we had, because there was no conceivable vision in our head that we'd be able to go out and raise money to fund the burn. It was, the burn had to be funded by the revenues we were collecting every single week. And for a period of about 2 years there, crazy as it sounds now looking back on it, we were running with less than 2 weeks of cash in the bank all the time. It's like every single week we're just hoping to make enough money to make the next payroll. And then when you made the next payroll, we make enough money to pay the rent. And then when you paid the rent, you're hoping we make enough money to pay the next payroll. And it was like that for about 2 years, just truly just grinding every single month for about 2 years.
Did you miss payroll? Did you miss any of that? I mean, were there times where people went without, or did you?
No, luckily we didn't miss payroll, but we had two specific instances where we were within probably a week of having to basically lay off almost everybody in the company.
Wow.
One of them, we got so close, we even had the email drafted where we were going to tell everybody that, sorry, we don't have enough money to pay everybody, so we're going to lay you off. So we had two really near-death experiences. And that first one, it was amazing. It was right before Christmas, and we had never gone through a full Christmas cycle selling product in the video game industry. And those of you who have ever been in video games and toys, you know that about a third of all your sales come within that Christmas. Literally, almost all that entire thing comes between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so we thought we would have to lay off all of our people before Christmas.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, Black Friday hit, and it was like all these orders came pouring through the website, and it was like gift from like money falling from the heavens. You're like, oh my God, where are all these orders coming from? And then that actually gave us enough money to make payroll.
Wow.
And we made enough money over the next month to continue, and it just was.
That was what year?
I think that was 2001.
Okay.
Was the year that the year that we really almost ran out of money. And then there was another time where we almost did, somehow we almost ran into that situation again. But we still had that entire mentality through the entire history of the company. Was we treated it as if we were, we had 2 weeks of money in the bank. And the way I like to describe it to some people who, it's very different than running a VC-funded business, or after we got acquired by Activision, we were part of a big company. I joke that when we were on our own, it was like you went to the mall and you had to shop with cash. Like if you had $100 in your pocket, you were only going to walk out of there with $100 worth of stuff. But when you were VC funded or you had a big company, it's like you had a credit card and you walked in there and you just start swiping your card, and it was almost unlimited. And we had this mentality that we were always shopping with cash, and so it was never, we were not allowed to any given month spend more money than we were bringing in.
So you start as this subscription business for renting games, and then you transition, you pivot into doing the dance pad and accessories. And then tell us how that evolved into actually making software.
Yeah, so what we realized back then was Dance Dance Revolution was made by another company, a Japanese company called Konami. And Konami had brought Dance Dance Revolution to the United States, but they weren't pushing it particularly hard, primarily because they had another game, another property that was huge at the time called Yu-Gi-Oh! And so DDR was just an afterthought. And so we sat there and thought, whoops, sorry, let me shut that off. So sorry about that. So what we thought at the time was, well, geez, what if Konami decided tomorrow to stop making DDR or stop selling it in the U.S.? Then we'd be out of business. And so we realized, well, we need to do more to be in charge of our own future. And so we started thinking about ways to make video games, and that's how we pivoted into becoming a video game publisher. Specifically, there was a dance game in the arcade called In the Groove, which was sort of had a following amongst hardcore DDR players. Huh. And so what we literally did was we took that product, found the developers, and said, hey, are you guys interested in making a PlayStation 2 version of it? We'll fund it, and then we'll publish it. So we'll do all the sales and distribution. And that's how we got into the video game side of the business, was through that first dance game called In the Groove, which was moderately successful. It took our company from, I guess, about $3 million in revenues up to about $9 million in revenues. And it was the profits off of that allowed us to do our second game, which was Guitar Hero.
And talk to us about where that idea came from. Were you guys guitar fans? Were you players? Was that the natural progression from In the Groove?
Yeah, so we had been thinking ever since we started making dance pads and started looking at dance games. Our thoughts had always been around how we could make them popular in the U.S. and Europe, because they were enormously popular in Asia. DDR was about as popular a game as there was in the late 90s in Asia. And we couldn't figure out, these games are great, they're super fun, but for some reason, they're just not working in the U.S. and in Europe. And so we were experimenting with things. So in the groove, we put a lot of English songs, right? Because DDR had a lot of J-pop, random mixes of songs that people weren't really, that enthusiastic about in the U.S. or Europe. But the game itself was fun. And so we had to play with the formula. In our first attempt to put English songs in the game, I think, helped make it more accessible. But these were a lot of songs that nobody had ever heard of. And so, part of our thinking then was, well, we need to make another music game that would strike at the core of American and European audiences. We need to experiment with the music mix more, try to get songs that people knew and understood. And there were a lot of music games in Asia at the time that, we enjoyed playing. So actually, it wasn't specifically that any of us were guitar players. What happened was we took a look at a bunch of music games. One of the favorites was another Konami game called Guitar Freaks, which was a guitar game, played very similarly. But we took a look at that and said, man, this thing is fun, but if we could just make a few changes, we think that would be a really fun game. And amongst the changes we thought was, if you're going to make a game about a guitar, it should be about rock and metal and everything that is rock metal. So we started talking to a studio in Boston called Harmonix. We had met them a few years before when they were doing another music game for Sony. They were sort of another underdog music game company.
Yeah, crazy story. They're very similar to you, right? I mean, they almost went out of business a number of times.
They had been trying to make music games in the United States for 10 years without any success. We had always talked about working together. Because when we first met, we were this music game hardware company, and they were this music game software company, and neither one of us had much success, but we had visions of what we could do. And so when we got together, we said, hey, we're thinking about doing this game around a guitar. And they said, that's funny. We've been thinking about doing a game around the guitar too. And so the ideas just started flowing, and it meshed. It was like Guitar Hero was an incredible experience in that from the first day that we talked about it, which was in February, till the day we released it, which was in November, everything about it just seemed like this magical experience. You hear musicians talk about how music, sometimes the right songs just flow from your head. It was like that. It was like every idea just came so smoothly. It was like, yeah, this works, this works, this works. And you didn't have to do market research. You didn't have to think. I guess it had just been the culmination of both of us thinking about music games for so long. We started in February, like I said. That game was crazy. We tried to make our first demo for E3 in May.
May, wow.
Yeah. And
you made it, right? I mean, that's a big part of the story of how you guys became successful, right?
Yeah, we did. We won some awards at E3 for,
But you weren't on the floor. You were down in the indie,
we were
back
down
in the basement.
In the basement, what I call the bowels of E3, right?
Yeah.
Literally down in the basement where nobody went. The reporters and reviewers are going down there saying, "We in the right place?" Because this is where random Chinese companies making unbranded game controllers and things like that were hanging out at this hall they call Kensha Hall. And so we were down there. We didn't even have a booth. We had a little meeting room that we had set up. The crazy background to that was the whole time we had been working on. We had a team working on the hardware for the controller, and Harmonix was of course churning away on the software. And nobody knew how the other side was really working. The first time we saw the first software build was at E3, and the first time they saw the guitar build was at E3. We had it shipped directly from China to LA. And we showed up there, and they showed up with their disc, and we showed up with the controllers just praying, I hope this thing works. And you plugged it into the PlayStation 2, and it's like, oh my God, it actually does work. Because before that, all we had seen were the first builds, which were literally dots on a black screen falling down. And that's all Guitar Hero was, and then they had not seen any controllers, and so they didn't really know how any of it was going to work, and we didn't know how the software was going to work. Wow. And we showed up at E3 and it worked, and we were showing reviewers, and it actually walked away with one of the Best of Show awards for the entire show. Most games we were that year competing with games like Resident Evil, and there's a bunch of hit games. Tony Hawk was huge by Activision at the time, and of course EA is showing Madden and all these games.
Need for Speed.
Yeah, Need for Speed, and our budget, which was laughable. I mean, our budget for Guitar Hero 1 was $1.7 million, which for a PlayStation game, I mean, most other budgets were probably at least 10x that. You know, after we joined Activision, we realized that most of their other games were running budgets closer to $30 to $40 million, and you know, we had made a game for $1.7 million that was competing for Game of the Year. But the product itself had a just very unique fun factor, right? The software wasn't sophisticated, the hardware wasn't sophisticated, so there wasn't a lot of cost in development. But the user experience, what I call that, you know, the UX was just so fun, and it captured this, and it captured that experience so tightly that we didn't need to spend millions of dollars prettying out the graphics. It was a game that really sold what we call the fun factor, and it couldn't be explained. You couldn't see it. You know, you had to touch it, feel it, and you hit 5 notes, and suddenly you realize, wow, this is really fun. And that's what we, you know, why we had to put it in people's hands and demo it, because as soon as they played it, they realized what it was about. It also struck this chord, I thought, with rock, metal, and U.S. and European audiences, that we weren't selling a guitar simulation. What we thought we were really selling was this aspiration of you being a rock star, right? So like kids in the U.S. and in Europe grow up dreaming of being rock stars. And of course, like 99% of the people can't ever be a musician, right? Because we just don't have the talent for being musicians. But you still have that dream. And what we didn't realize was how many people had that aspiration. And so the minute you put it on, I was talking to a famous reviewer, Ngai Kroll.
Newsweek, ex-Newsweek guy.
Yeah, Newsweek. And he was telling me that when he first saw Guitar Hero, he thought it was the stupidest thing he'd ever seen. And his colleagues kept telling him, you got to try this game. You got to try this game. It's fantastic. And he said, finally, by the time Guitar Hero 2 released, somebody convinced him, said, you got to try this, Ngai. And he realized, yeah, this thing's getting huge. I should try it. And he said the minute he put the guitar around his neck, he said, I didn't even have to play the game. I just knew, because it made him feel like he was a rock star. And he said that's all it was. It just captured that spontaneous moment where you felt like you're a rock star. There was no time to focus, test anything. We were, we had very tight deadlines. But we had this belief that, we never imagined Guitar Hero was going to be a massive hit. But we had this belief that it was a good game that people would have fun playing. And we had this belief that there would be an audience for it based on everything that we had seen renting music games to, niche audiences in the U.S. So, like a lot of our other projects at the time, our goal with Guitar Hero was just not to lose money, right? So, we always said that we minimized the downside, which was we thought we could break even, and then we tried to maximize the upside from there. And so that was our entire philosophy heading in, was 1.75 million. We figured, yeah, we could break even on that, especially after we started to win awards. But even after we started to win awards, there was still a lot of skepticism within the industry.
Could have gone mainstream.
Yeah. We started to pitch the game in the summertime to retailers, and despite the fact that this game was winning awards, most retailers didn't take the product, didn't carry the product. We only got 2 to take the product out of the 6 or 7 that we pitched.
Who was that? Who took it?
GameStop took it, and they're almost obligated to take almost every video game product, right? Because GameStop is where hardcore gamers shop, so you have to have everything.
Right.
So it wasn't hard to get in there. And then the only other retailer that took the product was Best Buy.
Huh.
And nobody else. We pitched Target, we pitched Walmart, Toys R Us.
Circuit City.
Yeah, Circuit City. Toys R Us was the fascinating one. We showed it to a buyer there, and never heard back from him. and literally that Christmas season where Guitar Hero 1 was released, we heard from one of his colleagues saying, he basically locks himself in the office all day and just plays Guitar Hero. That's all he does all day. But he still refused to buy the product and carry it. Because I think there was just this ingrained belief that this game was just not did not fit the mold of every other successful game. This box was big. It doesn't fit correctly on the shelves, right? The shelves are meant for stock these old DVD jewel cases. This price is too high. The games sell for $49. You want to sell your game for, $69. That doesn't make any sense. Why would somebody pay that much? The idea that music games didn't sell in the United States because they look at sales data, which is backwards looking, and they go, music games never sell in the United States. So we had all these things, that conventional wisdom that worked against us. Even though you put the game in that buyer's hand and he can't stop playing it, something in his head still tells him this will never sell.
Yeah. Did you ever, when you first came to Harmonix and you guys first started talking about these ideas, did you get worried about sharing your idea with them? You guys were the hardware guys, they were the software guys, but either one of you could have, you could have become direct competitors right then.
Yeah. It's, I guess in most of the things we do, we tend to be more open about collaborating with other companies. And I think part of the reason comes from the fact that we didn't have enough resources to be able to build everything internally. But the bigger part was, our belief at the time was, we would go anywhere in the world and talk to anybody that was working on music games, because we never felt like we would have all the great ideas just in our little company. And what makes games work is great ideas, creativity. And we always thought that you had to find that and search that out anywhere on the planet. So we would go to Japan to talk to somebody making music games. We'd go to the UK. It didn't matter where you were. Anywhere where there was somebody working on a music game, we'd go and talk to them, because it was more likely that we'd be able to increase the sort of the scope of our thinking about music games through that interaction.
So talk to us. You launched the first game in 2005, right? Fall, Christmas season 2005, and then tell us about the next 2 or 3 years. What happened after that?
Yeah. So heading into that fall, I'll just start there and tell you about how things ramped up. So heading into that fall, it was crazy. Retailers refused to take the product. We were out there trying to, on this weird path where we were starting to win awards, and still nobody was carrying the product. We tried to raise money to fund the initial inventory. We just tried to raise $3 million from VCs. The previous year, we had done $9 million in revenue, as I mentioned, and we had netted almost $3 million. So it wasn't like we were like a startup that was burning cash. We were already profitable. We tried to raise $3 million, and we couldn't get anybody to invest money. Part of the reason was, at the time, video games were just considered an uninvestable category by VCs, right? It was hit-driven. You show us 2 racing games, we can't tell you which one will sell better. So the whole category was just off limits. So in order to get the game out, my brother and I, took out second mortgages and credit card debt and whatever money we could to buy inventory for the launch of Guitar Hero 1. And
this is after the awards. This is after the praise and things.
Yeah, this is after we started winning awards.
Amazing.
And people still didn't think that the game would sell. One guy literally told us, "That looks like a fantastic game. Too bad you're going to go out of business trying to sell it," right? Because it was just so deeply ingrained that a game like this, with all these things working against it, the big box, the high price point, just wouldn't work.
When Harmonix too, they had this string of critically acclaimed games that were not commercial hits,
yes,
right? So I don't know if that played into it as well.
Yeah, they had talked about the curse of 170,000 units, which was like they could never break that, which meant that none of their previous games were profitable. So none of us had really high expectations. We launched the game in November. Best Buy had given us a forecast that they thought they could sell 30,000 units of this game through the Christmas season. So that was really for us, 2 weeks in November, December, and January. The day that it launched, they sold 3,000 in the first 2 hours, and they called us and said, "Hey, we need 80,000 units next week." And we said, "No, you don't understand how this works, right? Like, we make these guitars in China, and they come over on a boat, and next week we're getting 5,000 units, right? And you're going to have to split that with GameStop." And that's how it was. That's how Guitar Hero became the hardest game to find that Christmas. Was the dirty secret was partially because we couldn't make enough inventory because we didn't have the money to build inventory. But it was the hardest game to find. GameStop store clerks were telling us, they started answering the phones. Just, they pick up the phone and go, no, we don't have Guitar Hero. They don't even wait for the person to ask. We don't have Guitar Hero. So that first year, Guitar Hero was essentially sold out everywhere. We were making guitars as fast as we could out of China. In our first year, we sold, the first 11 months, I say 11 months because Activision bought us at that time. So we sold $45 million worth of Guitar Hero.
Wow.
And it was crazy. We couldn't raise $3 million in September, heading into the November launch. November, the game launches. December, it becomes, it was the second best-selling game in the U.S. And it was only number 2 because we didn't have enough inventory. And that sales data is released in January. So January, we started getting calls from private equity firms to invest $30 million in our company. And I was talking to my brother. I said, this is crazy. 3 months ago, they wouldn't invest $3 million.
Wow.
And now they want to invest 30. And the first day that we got a term sheet from one of them, Activision called us. And then, eventually, after a few months of negotiation, they bought the company in June. And so that was right around the time Guitar Hero 2 came out. And so Guitar Hero 2 then took us, as you were saying, it started to scale like crazy. It took us to $300 million in sales. By the time Guitar Hero 3 came out, that took us to $1.1 billion in sales. And then Guitar Hero 4 took us to $1.5 billion in sales. And then we came back down to $1 billion after that. That's another story.
And that's with Rock Band basically
Right.
splitting the market.
Exactly. That was with Rock Band splitting the market. That was with us engaged in this massive market share battle because they were acquired by Viacom at the time, and we were under Activision. And
So those that don't know, Harmonix, who was making the games with the software, they got acquired by Viacom.
Yeah.
And then you guys got acquired by Activision.
Yeah. So when the game came out, what all the big companies looked around and goes, what is this game? Who the hell made this? Who's Red Octane? Who's Harmonix? Nobody had, EA and Activision had, and everywhere on Microsoft said, who are these guys? And they started going around and talking to everybody. I think interestingly, Activision ended up, acquiring us, and then Viacom acquired Harmonix, and that sort of split the companies because Viacom and Activision had some lawsuit in some past history, and so the two parent companies were dead set against working with each other. So that set the course for now. There was going to be a Guitar Hero and there was going to be a Rock Band, which a couple years later, the game came out, and so we became we were collaborators. We eventually became competitors. Even though on a personal basis we were still friends. It was funny. We'd show up at shows. And people would assume that we were like mortal enemies, and that if we saw each other, it'd be a big knife fight or something like that. And we walk in, and we're still friends. So we'd hug each other, tell each other, how things were going. To this day, I guess the collaboration of two unknown companies making a product that kind of shook up an industry. We're still tight to this day. Talk to each other. People have come out of their company and we've worked with them. People have come out of our company and they've worked with them. So it was just an incredibly fruitful relationship.
I remember sitting in a meeting at EA, and the analyst there said, we were talking about Guitar Hero, and he said, well, I did the analysis on whether or not we should give an offer for Guitar Hero, and he said, at X number of $100 million or, so in the six-figure million range, he said, there was no precedence for it. We couldn't justify it. And then as you say, that next year, it just absolutely exploded. And and then it was kind of like, well, how couldn't you see it? But no one could really, no one had that vision of what the market and the product could become, except for the guys that were making it.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing I realized about sales data once, we were inside Activision, and a lot of big companies tend to rely a lot on sales data and marketing research. Sales data is inherently backwards looking. And what happens if you look at what games sold last year and you try to make games that sell a lot is you make the same game. So first-person shooters sold a lot last year. You'd make first-person shooters this year. And then, so inherently it drives this, when people complain about lack of innovation in video games, a lot of that I think is driven by this inherent sort of backwards looking philosophy of what sold last year must be what will sell this year, so we'll just make that.
Yeah.
And it works for some things. It works for how to improve the games incrementally, but it doesn't help you discover the next big game, which is why I think it's always surprising that the biggest game franchises just completely come out of left field, right? So World of Warcraft comes completely out of left field. Nobody thought that an MMO could reach millions, and it does. And Grand Theft Auto comes completely out of left field because nobody ever envisioned that an open world game would be interesting to players. And so a lot of these things happen because we don't have access, or we don't rely on backwards looking sales data. And a lot of the things happen for us because of out of sheer ignorance, quite frankly, right? Because we didn't know that retailers like Walmart and Target wouldn't stock a big box on their shelves, and we didn't know that you weren't supposed to charge more than $50 for a video game. And to a lot of people's surprise, for the first 5 years of the company, even when we were making, up to the point where we started making Guitar Hero, we did not have a single person in Red Octane out of the 25 people or so. We did not have a single person that had ever worked in another video game company before. All of us were like first timers, and none of us had ever made a video game. None of us had ever made video game controllers, and so we had this. Was
that by design, or could you not poach people from other? I mean, did you want people from other companies?
Yeah, I think just like people wouldn't come work for us. I wanted anything, but it was liberating in the sense that we knew what we wanted to play, and we knew this audience, and we didn't have to. We didn't have to live by all the constraints of sort of industry convention. And a lot of times that's what I find myself battling the most, is the second time around assuming that, that won't work. And then I have to find myself, try to catch myself when I say that, because then I recall hearing people tell me the same things. Like, well, that's not going to work.
What motivated you guys to see it through and to push forward on your vision, even though there basically was no data or anything that backed up other than what you thought that it was going to work?
Yeah. The thing that we had was, through our e-commerce business, right, early on, we had direct conversations with consumers. So that's one thing I always advise companies, if you can, is talk directly to the consumers, right? It's difficult to get this information if you have sort of a middleman, whether it's a retailer or another e-tailer or some channel partner, because you just don't have that information. We were talking directly with consumers. They were emailing us to tell us why our products sucked, why they were breaking down. And so over the years, we just learned a ton from direct interaction with consumers. And we'd go to trade shows that were consumer trade shows. So we'd show up at like Comic-Con and Anime Expo and set up booths, and people would come and play the games and tell us what they thought of the product. So we had this feeling that we could sell enough games. We could sell enough Guitar Hero games to break even. And that was sort of our belief, was that we knew this audience. We had a way to sell it online. We were never going to let somebody stop a great game from getting to the market, right? So even if no retailer carried the product, we would still sell it online, and we thought we could sell enough units to break even. And so being able to control our own distribution was critical in that sense, and not relying on somebody else to be willing to distribute our product for us. So just the confidence that we had that we control the risks enough that we felt like we could have a positive ROI, and we controlled our distribution enough that we felt like even if nobody in the world wanted to carry Guitar Hero, we could still sell this product. Having those in place allowed us to make crazy bets, like take out second mortgages and borrow money from friends and whatnot to pay for Guitar Hero 1 inventory. And then it's once the game comes out, then everything completely flips almost immediately to where it becomes accepted sort of convention that, of course, this is this is what consumers want, and then you at that point you're struggling with a different set of issues than you were going into it when there's a healthy amount of skepticism. So for all of you guys that are sort of in this startup grind, is that you'll likely come into the same inflection point in your business, right? When they use that term inflection point, it really was an inflection point where within a matter of a couple of weeks, everybody's viewpoint on this game just changed completely. And they went from, this will never work, to, oh my God, you need to ship us 80,000 units next week. And it literally does change. For us, with that specific instance, it changed in 2 hours. 2 hours of data. Told Best Buy that we should order 80,000 next week instead of 30,000 for the entire Christmas season.
But you could have, 5 years earlier, you could have just as easily have never even existed. You could have gone out of business 5 years earlier, right? You guys found a way to, we use the word pivot, but you just iterated, and you kind of just found your way to what eventually became, an amazing product. But
Yes.
It was far from what you ever started doing in the beginning.
Ironically, the fact that we were never able to raise money helped.
Yeah.
In the sense that we could sit in a room and just decide, do we want to do this? And if we decided we wanted to do it, then we'd do it, right? And not having sort of what I call adult supervision around, telling you what you should or shouldn't do, helped a ton for us in those instances. If we believed in the product, we would just do it. As long as we could make money, or we thought we wouldn't break even, or lose money, we would just go ahead and do it. So that helped immensely with the ability to pivot. Was not having adult supervision looking over our shoulders. And the second thing that allowed us was what we talked about earlier, was this, the financial independence of being not just profitable, but cash flow positive, and knowing that you're not going to have to go raise money somewhere gives you the ability to do things that you can't otherwise do. So some of you, it's rare in a lot of tech companies, right? Because I frequently have discussions with some of my VC friends who've seen a lot of startups, and I will ask them, have you ever seen another startup? Because we never raise a penny from VCs. Have you seen another?
What about didn't you raise $1 million, or was that from
that
friends
was from,
and family?
That was from friends and family.
Okay.
Yeah, that was '99, where people were willing to
I see, yeah.
invest money in startups. So we never took VC money. It was only friends and family and relatives and things. And I would ask them, have you ever seen another company that didn't take VC funding and that had an exit, and I arbitrarily just picked, that was $100 million or higher? And only one of them ever came up with an example. They said they thought VMware had done it. Was the only other company they thought they'd ever seen in the Valley here do that. But I think it is just such a part of the conventional mindset that what you do as a startup is you build your prototype, or your initial proof of concept. Then you go raise a bunch of money, hire a bunch of people, build it bigger, right? Try to scale this thing, raise some more money, scale this thing bigger. And that's just so ingrained in the Valley that nobody had even thought of another path that was possible. And because that path was cut off from us, we had to find our way through, which was incredibly rough because it was such a grind. But the positive side of that was that we had complete freedom to do whatever we wanted. I had a friend who would ask me later on, he said, how about Guitar Hero? He said, how in the world did you guys greenlight this thing? Because at EA Activision, you would never have gone through the first greenlight meeting with a concept as preposterous as that. And I said, well, there was just 3 of us in the room. And we just said it.
We were all drunk.
Yeah, exactly. No, there was no alcohol involved in that. But we just said, do we want to do it? And if we said we wanted to do it, we would do it. So that, I think, those factors helped create that environment for us where we could take a risk like that.
We're in the Blue Goji and Green Throttle offices here. Tell us what you guys are doing now, and why you're so passionate about it, why it's exciting to you.
Yeah. So before we had started, I had some interesting advice from a friend of mine. His name is Mike Wood. He was the founder of a company called Leapfrog, which made the Leap Pad. If you guys have seen that, if you have kids, you may have seen that product. And he was, a second-time entrepreneur, and he said something interesting to me. He said, before you start, think hard about this. He said, because you have to find something that you're passionate about going to work for, because it's too easy to get distracted by other things, number one. And he said, number two, you're really signing up for the second startup and the third startup, because if the second one goes under, you're going to have to do a third just to prove that the first one wasn't a fluke. And so that made me think long and hard. I'm like, wow, do I want to really do 3? But there was something for us that back when we did dance games, about half the people were using dance games as exercise products, and about half were playing them as music games. And we always thought that was interesting, was to explore this idea of using games as exercise. And so we were working with researchers at UCSF doing research on kids with type 2 diabetes, kids with hypertension. We're doing projects with educational, like elementary schools in Portland that were using dance games inside the classroom to help kids study. And so we thought that was an interesting path. But when Guitar Hero came out, Red Octane became kind of all Guitar Hero all the time, right? We couldn't do anything else. And so when we finally left Activision in 2010, we thought we wanted to go back to that. And in the interim, Wii Fit had come out and taught the world you could use a video game to exercise. And there were all these exciting new platforms, mobile phones, Facebook games, right? All these things that we could build games on. So we started working on ideas for that, what I call sort of making the world healthier through video games. And that was how we started work on Blue Goji, which I'll be happy to demo the product later on for those of you who are interested. But what we started looking at was how can we build games that make people healthier, that make you exercise more, that make you treat different areas of wellness and treat areas of pain. We talked to a lot of health insurers, we talked to doctors, we talked to hospitals. We started just trying to learn as much as we could about which areas might be impactful if we could apply video game concepts to. We started looking in the area of exercise, and to use a very simple metaphor, what we learned from them was that it's just gospel within the medical community that exercise is good for you. And if you could get more exercise, even better. So their whole objective is to get people to exercise and to get people to exercise more. And that's where we thought video games could help, because video games are very good at getting people to do things, for hours and hours at a time. And so we started using this metaphor with them to get them to understand how we could work and contribute in that area. So what we said was, if you took a bunch of kids into the middle of a field and you made them run wind sprints, one side of the field to the other side, they're going to do like 2 wind sprints, and they're going to say, this really sucks. And they're going to stop. This is boring. This is painful. But if you took them in the middle of a field, they were trying things that, what I call gamification, which works, but it's slightly different than what we're trying. So the gamification would be, we'll go out in the middle of a field, and I'll give you a point for every wind sprint you do. And we'll time you and put you up on a leaderboard to see who's the fastest and all these things, right? Who runs the most. And that works to motivate people. But what you could also do is take a bunch of kids in the middle of a field and play tag. You say, tag, you're it. And the game starts, right? And
they'll just instinctively start running.
People just start running, sprinting in all directions. And biomechanically, it's the exact same thing. You're not doing anything other than running on a field. But kids will play tag for 30 minutes, an hour. And they'll laugh while they're playing tag. You hear laughter and joy. Nobody ever laughs when they do wind sprints, right? But they laugh when they play tag. And that's what we wanted to do, was we wanted to create tag where other people see sort of wind sprints and exercise. We wanted to create experiences like tag. And so we started looking at trying to build games on top of higher intensity level exercises than what Wii Fit had tried. We started looking at ways to make exercises that people already do a lot more fun. So exercises like hopping on an elliptical machine or a stationary bike or a treadmill. We started looking at ways we could apply games to make that more fun. We started to look at other things, like how can we use games to help people cope with lower back pain? Because that was a big problem for all of you guys who are in startups, and you know that you probably sit in front of your computer for more hours than is really healthy. And if you do that for enough years, 10, 15 years, you're going to develop back problems. And so that was a big problem that we learned from the medical community, was the number one reason people miss work in the United States is lower back pain. The number 2 reason why people go to the doctor in the United States is lower back pain. Colds and flus is number 1 reason you go to the doctor, and lower back pain is number 2. So we started looking at these things and trying to figure out, can we use video games and apply those concepts that we use in video games to help people cope with the sort of the rigors and the grind of exercise, and cope with basic pain like lower back pain.
You've co-founded it with several other guys, and how big is the company? Have you raised money? Are you bootstrapping again? What are you doing?
Now, so that one we founded with two other co-founders. So my brother, who started Red Octane with me,
Yep.
and a third co-founder. His name is Coleman Fung. He's in Texas. He's kind of a data guy. He founded previously a financial sort of trading software that people that trade derivatives in oil and energy and commodities use. So I've never seen it, but like Wall Street bankers and those types use his software that his company had done. So he's a big data guy, and we started the company with two offices, one in Austin and one in the Bay Area, for a couple of reasons. One was not just because Coleman lived in Austin, but because in this environment it becomes so hard to hire teams that we thought being able to hire from two geographic locations would be helpful for us. And this one we
It can't be hard for you to hire now, though, right? Is it still hard for you to hire?
It's well, what I've seen a lot, and we haven't sort of really run into this problem yet, is what I've seen a lot is startups that get into about the 12 to 15 person size, and then they begin to churn. Like the next quarter they hire 2 or 3 people, but they lose 2 or 3, right? And so I've seen a lot of that happen. Trying to break through that seems to be difficult. But if you can, and so, we try to look at being able to hire. We had always, even in Red Octane, been pretty sort of adventurous in terms of, we had offices in Hong Kong, China. We had a game development studio in India. We found out we were the first foreign-owned or foreign video game company to have our own subsidiary in India. So we had a 50-person game development studio in India. And so we were always seeking out, ways to find some kind of competitive advantage.
Yep.
So, office in Austin and office here. It's a relatively small team right now. We've got 8 people. And so we do the same thing that we did with Guitar Hero, is we find a way to outsource a lot of the hardware engineering to the people that we worked with before on Guitar Hero. We find a lot of, we develop some of the games internally, but we also work with external developers to make games. We find that it's faster and more efficient for us to do that, and we get more ideas. So we try to build as broad a network as we can around this product, but our company itself is really only about 8 people.
Yep.
Is that the Goji or the Green Flower?
That's Blue Goji, yes. That's our.
Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask, and then maybe we can check out the product? Yes, Steve?
Yes.
Go ahead.
What was it like working, or did you have to work with the record companies and the artists and,
Yeah.
I can imagine all kinds of legal issues with
Yeah, that was sheer hell.
that. Yeah.
No, I'm joking. Sort of. No, I always used to joke that when you have to deal with the record industry, it's like dealing with borderline criminals sometimes. People in the music industry would at least some of the artists would truly appreciate like they are borderline. Now, what happens when you get to deal with the music industry is music rights are so sort of fast changing, right? They're evolving so quickly because there's all sorts of new ways to distribute music. That it's very complex. So you'd end up with different royalty rates for downloadable music into the same game versus music that was shipped on a disc. And for us, we had to deal early on with the fact that we were an unknown entity trying to make a game that we couldn't show anybody because it wasn't done yet what that game was. So in the first Guitar Hero game, we couldn't get clearance for any of the original recordings. It was all re-records, which Will in the back and the Wave Group helped us put together all the re-records because that was all anybody would give us access to, except for one person. Zach Weil from Black Label Society actually gave us an original. And just to give you the brief story, the story was that his manager asked him, hey, they want to license your song for this game called Guitar Hero. And he kind of joked, well, if they're making a game called Guitar Hero, I should be in this game, which he should be, right? and then they said, well, they're going to re-record the song, and he said, no, nobody re-records my stuff. Give them the original. And so that's how we got our first master recording. By the time Guitar Hero 2 came, it was sort of a hit. There was starting to be a following. We got a few, master original recordings, but we also had this event happen where there was a guitarist, goes by the name Buckethead. If some of you may say he's toured with Guns N' Roses, he actually performs with a Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket on his head. And Buckethead liked the game, so he actually wrote a song just for Guitar Hero 2. And he said, I'm going to write a song for you, and it's going to be the hardest song in Guitar Hero 2. So he wrote a song called Jordan, named after Michael Jordan, because he thought this was going to be the hardest song. And we put it in the game. And a very interesting thing happened with that is a guitar tab showed up in one of the guitar magazines, I can't remember, that said Jordan by Buckethead as appears. Usually they put the name of the album, but it says as appeared in Guitar Hero 2. And that was one of the first times that sort of an original song from a video game, had appeared in sort of a music publication. And then all of a sudden, that sort of broke some doors open. So Guitar Hero 3 came, and then crazy things happened. Like, we went to license music from the Sex Pistols, and we found out that all of the original recordings for the Sex Pistols had been lost or stolen or destroyed, something, right? Which is so ironic because that's exactly what you would expect to have happened with the Sex Pistols music, right? Because they're the Pistols. And so what they said was, well, if you pay for studio time, we'll get back together and re-record 3 songs for you. And I thought was, of course we'll pay for studio time. And what we were worried about then was, well, but Sid Vicious is dead. Like, how are you going to do this? And what we learned from them was, well, when they recorded their first album, Nevermind the Ball, like, Sid was actually in the hospital with hepatitis, so he was never on the first album anyway. So they said, yeah, we don't need Sid. We'll just do this anyway. And they got back together. They re-recorded. We even got some B-roll of them telling that whole story. And that became an event in that, they got on the Tonight Show. They got on some other, late night shows as, hey, the Sex Pistols got back together and are playing again. And they were able to do 2 concerts, one date in London and one in L.A. as a result of them getting back together in the studio and re-recording a song for guitar, or 3 songs for Guitar Hero.
Wow.
So we got Anarchy in the UK, which in the game, if you see it, it says Anarchy in the UK by the Sex Pistols, and the date on it is 2007, because that was the year they actually recorded that version. So from there, of getting sort of, famous bands to work on music, that evolved to, then we were able to get, we got Slash in the game. We were then able to get Aerosmith to do a complete game just around Aerosmith music. And a lot of that was through, Slash talking to Joe Perry and telling him, yeah, this was a cool project that I did. And then Joe Perry said, yeah, we should do one. And so, we were then able to do a complete Guitar Hero set or game with Aerosmith. We were able to do one, Guitar Hero Metallica, where we released the entire game, they had a new album coming out called Death Magnetic. And we were able to release that album date and date on Guitar Hero the same time they released the full album, CD in stores. What was fascinating about that was we found out later from them that Guitar Hero was actually the 3rd biggest sales channel for Death Magnetic. Number 1 was apparently Walmart. Number 2 was Best Buy. Number 3 was Guitar Hero downloads. And so interesting things happened, very quickly over the course of basically 3 or 4 years, from the point where we couldn't get anybody to give us original recordings to, the Sex Pistols getting back and re-recording to Metallica releasing their album basically at the same time, through the video game as in store.
Are you still working with your brother?
Yeah, I do still work together with my brother, crazy as that is. It's a particular challenge. Any of you who work with siblings or spouses, it's it can be a very difficult thing because you don't have to be tactful to each other, right? So when he would say something, I would tell in a meeting, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And then a big argument would ensue, just like when we were 5 years old. And you slam the door and leave the room. And then the next day you come into the office and everything's okay, right? Because That's the way you are as brothers. But
Well, some brothers.
yes.
It's good you guys are like that.
Yeah. But there's a level of trust and understanding that happens too, right? So you don't have to spend any time figuring out what the other person would think. We almost instinctively know whether the other will like this idea or not. You also know each other's strengths and weaknesses better. So there's a lot of benefits to that. And one thing that was fascinating was I don't know how much we enjoyed the times we were working together and arguing, but my parents liked the fact that we worked together, and it basically achieved the same level of success, because my mom used to joke that it would have been horrible if one of us had made Guitar Hero and the other had not.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I think is really cool about Guitar Hero is how you managed to make a non-violent video game that wasn't wimpy and lame, but
Right.
was still like really cool and macho. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah. The edginess comes from the music, right? The music and the art style that's associated with rock metal. But you're exactly right. There was no violence. There was no, other than, like, the only things we would ever get dinged for in the ratings were lyrics, depending on the songs that we picked, right? But parents were generally very comfortable. And I think that was what was helpful for getting Guitar Hero exposed to a broad audience, was people felt comfortable letting 6-year-olds play the game, and people that were 60-year-old felt comfortable playing the game. There were a couple instances where I thought that was particularly sort of poignant to me about the fact that it was a non-violent video game and how broad an audience it attracts. So a friend of mine gave Guitar Hero to his young, he had a nephew that was 6 years old. His nephew came into the kitchen one day. I think his nephew's mom did not know that he was playing Guitar Hero. He came into the kitchen and he was whistling Cheap Trick, I Surrender. And she heard that. She said, how in the world does he know Cheap Trick? Because he's 6 years old, right? And then she asked him, how do you know that song? And he said, oh, it's a Guitar Hero song. He has no idea it's Cheap Trick. He just knows it's a Guitar Hero song. And so it was cool in the sense that it bridges those generations. And that was especially impactful to me. One time after Guitar Hero 1 came out, we got an email from this person, and he was a dad. I think he was from the Midwest, if I remember right. But he sent us an email saying that he had spent the previous night playing Guitar Hero with his daughter, his teenage daughter, for about 2.5 hours. And she was asking about the bands and the songs, because those were the songs he grew up listening to. And he was talking to her, and she was explaining the video game to him. And he wrote an email to us just to thank us. He said, I have not had a bonding moment like that with my teenage daughter in years. And I just want to thank you for that. And that was extremely sort of moving for us, that you could have people of different generations sharing a sort of an experience like that, whether they were brought in through the music or they were brought in through the video games. And so that was the best part about sort of creating a nonviolent video game and really pushing that into audiences that previously didn't play video games.
We give Charles a big round of applause here.